The Conjunction of Two Stars. Part 1. Marius was now a fine-looking young man, of medium height, with heavy jet-black hair, a high, intelligent brow, large and passionate nostrils, a frank and calm expression, and an indescribable something beaming from every feature, which was at once lofty, thoughtful, and innocent. His profile, all the lines of which were rounded, but without loss of strength, possessed that Germanic gentleness which has made its way into French physiognomy, through Alsace and Lorraine, and that entire absence of angles which rendered the Scimbiari so recognizable among the Romans, and which distinguishes the Leonine from the Aquiline race. He was at that season of life at which the minds of men who think are made up in nearly equal proportions of depth and simplicity. In a difficult situation he possessed all the essentials of stupidity. Another turn of the screw, and he could become sublime. His manners were reserved, cold, polished, far from free. But as his mouth was very pleasant, his lips the reddest, and his teeth the whitest in the world, his smile corrected the severity of his physiognomy. At certain moments there was a strange contrast between this chaste brow and this voluptuous smile. His eye was small, his look great. At the time of his most wretched poverty, he noticed that girls turned when he passed, and with a deathly feeling in his heart he fled or hid himself. He thought that they looked at him on account of his old clothes, that they were laughing at him. The truth is that they looked at him because of his graceful appearance, and they dreamed over it. There were, however, in all the immensity of creation, two women from whom Marius never fled, and whom he did not at all avoid. Indeed, he would have been very much astonished had anyone told him that they were women. One was the old woman with the beard who swept his room, and who gave Courfeyrac an opportunity to say, "As his servant wears her beard, Marius does not wear his." The other was a little girl, whom he saw very often, and whom he never looked at. For more than a year, Marius had noticed in a retired walk of the Luxembourg, the walk which borders the parapet of the Pépinière, a man and a girl, quite young, nearly always sitting side by side on the same seat, at the most retired end of the walk, near the Rue de l'Ouest. Whenever that chance, which controls the promenades of men whose eye is turned within, led Marius to this walk, and it was almost every day, he found this couple there. The man might be 60 years old. He seemed sad and serious. His whole person presented the robust but wearied appearance of a soldier retired from active service. Had he worn a decoration, Marius would have said, "It is an old officer." His expression was kind, but did not invite approach, and he never returned a look. He wore a blue coat and pantaloons, and a broad-brimmed hat, which always appeared to be anew, a black cravat, and a Quaker linen, that is to say, brilliantly white, but of coarse texture. A grisette, passing near him one day, said, "There is a very nice widower." His hair was perfectly white. The first time the young girl that accompanied him sat down on the seat which they seemed to have adopted, she looked like a girl of about 13 or 14, puny to the extent of being almost ugly, awkward, insignificant, yet promising perhaps to have rather fine eyes, but they were always looking about with a disagreeable assurance. She wore the dress, at once aged and childish, peculiar to the convent schoolgirl, an ill-fitting garment of coarse black merino. They appeared to be father and daughter. For 2 or 3 days Marius scrutinized this old man, who was not yet an aged man, and this little girl, not yet a woman. Then he paid no more attention to them. For their part, they did not even seem to see him. They talked with each other peacefully, and with indifference to all else. The girl chatted incessantly and gaily. The old man spoke little, and at times looked upon her with an unutterable expression of fatherliness. Marius had acquired a sort of mechanical habit of promenading on this walk. He always found them there. It was usually thus. Marius would generally reach the walk at the end opposite their seat, promenade the whole length of it, passing before them, then return to the end by which he entered, and so on. He performed this turn 5 or 6 times in his promenade, and this promenade 5 or 6 times a week, but they and he had never come to exchange bows. This man and this young girl, though they appeared, and perhaps because they appeared to avoid observation, had naturally excited the attention of the 5 or 6 students, who, from time to time, took their promenades along the Pépinière, the studious after their lecture, the others after their game of billiards. Courfeyrac, who belonged to the latter, noticed them at some time or another, but finding the girl homely, had very quickly and carefully avoided them. He had fled like a Parthian, launching a nickname behind him. Struck especially by the dress of the little girl, and the hair of the old man, he had named the girl Mademoiselle Lenoir, which means black, and the father, Monsieur Leblanc, which means white. And so, as nobody knew them otherwise, in the absence of a name, this surname had become fixed. The students said, "Ah, Monsieur Leblanc is at his seat," and Marius, like the rest, had found it convenient to call this unknown gentleman Monsieur Leblanc. We shall do as they did, and say Monsieur Leblanc for the convenience of this story. Marius saw them thus nearly every day at the same hour during the first year. He found the man very much to his liking, but the girl rather disagreeable. Part 2. The second year, at the precise point of this history at which the reader has arrived, it so happened that Marius broke off his habit of going to the Luxembourg without really knowing why himself, and there were nearly 6 months during which he did not set foot in his walk. At last he went back there again one day. It was a serene summer morning. Marius was as happy as one always is when the weather is fine. It seemed to him as if he had in his heart all the bird songs which he heard, and all the bits of blue sky which he saw through the trees. He went straight to his walk, and as soon as he reached it, he saw, still on the same seat, this well-known pair. When he came near them, however, he saw that it was indeed the same man, but it seemed to him that it was no longer the same girl. The woman whom he saw now was a noble, beautiful creature, with all the most bewitching outlines of woman, at the precise moment at which they are combined with all the most charming graces of childhood. That pure and fleeting moment which can only be translated by these two words, sweet 15. Beautiful chestnut hair, shaded with veins of gold, a brow which seemed chiselled marble, cheeks which seemed made of roses, a pale incarnadine, a flushed whiteness, an exquisite mouth, whence came a smile like a gleam of sunshine, and a voice like music, a head which Raphael would have given to Mary, on a neck which Jean Goujon would have given to Venus, and that nothing might be wanting to this ravishing form. The nose was not beautiful, it was pretty, neither straight nor curved, neither Italian nor Greek. It was the Parisian nose, that is, something sprightly, fine, irregular, and pure, the despair of painters and the charm of poets. When Marius passed near her, he could not see her eyes, which were always cast down. He saw only her long chestnut lashes, eloquent of mystery and modesty. But that did not prevent the beautiful girl from smiling, as she listened to the white-haired man who was speaking to her, and nothing was so transporting as this maidenly smile with these downcast eyes. At the first instant, Marius thought it was another daughter of the same man, a sister doubtless of her whom he had seen before. But when the invariable habit of his promenade led him from the second time near the seat, and he had looked at her attentively, he recognized that she was the same. In 6 months the little girl had become a young woman. That was all. Nothing is more frequent than this phenomenon. There is a moment when girls bloom out in a twinkling, and become roses all at once. Yesterday we left them children. Today we find them dangerous. She had not only grown, she had become idealized. As 3 April days are enough for certain trees to put on a covering of flowers, so 6 months had been enough for her to put on a mantle of beauty. And then she was no longer the schoolgirl, with her plush hat, her merino dress, her shapeless shoes, and her red hands. Taste had come to her with beauty. She was a woman, with well dressed, with a sort of simple and rich elegance, without any particular style. She wore a dress of black damask, a mantle of the same, and a white crepe hat. Her white gloves showed the delicacy of her hand which played with the Chinese ivory handle of her parasol, and her silk boot betrayed the smallness of her foot. When you passed near her, her whole fragrance exhaled the penetrating fragrance of youth. As to the man, he was still the same. The second time that Marius came near her, the young girl raised her eyes. They were of a deep celestial blue, but in this veiled azure was nothing yet beyond the look of a child. She looked at Marius with indifference, as she would have looked at any little monkey playing under the sycamores, or the marble vase which cast its shadow over the bench. And Marius also continued his promenade, thinking of something else. He passed 4 or 5 times more by the seat where the young girl was, without even turning his eyes toward her. On the following days, he came as usual to the Luxembourg. As usual, he found the father and daughter there, but he paid no attention to them. He thought no more of this girl now that she was handsome than he had thought of her when she was homely. He passed very near the bench on which she sat, because that was his habit. Part 3. One day the air was mild. The Luxembourg was flooded with sunshine and shadow. The sky was as clear as if the angels had washed it in the morning. The sparrows were twittering in the depths of the chestnut trees. Marius had opened his whole soul to nature. He was thinking of nothing. He was living and breathing. He passed near this seat. The young girl raised her eyes. Their glances met. But what was there now in the glance of the young girl? Marius could not have told. There was nothing and there was everything. It was a strange flash. She cast down her eyes, and he continued on his way. What he had seen was not the simple, artless eye of a child. It was a mysterious abyss, half opened and then suddenly closed. There is a time when every young girl looks thus. Woe to him upon whom she looks. This first glance of a soul, which does not yet know itself, is like the dawn in the sky. It is the awakening of something radiant and unknown. Nothing can express the dangerous chasm of this unlooked-for gleam which suddenly suffuses adorable mysteries, and which is made up of all the innocence of the present and of all the passion of the future. It is a kind of irresolute lovingness which is revealed by chance, and which is waiting. It is a snare which innocence unconsciously spreads, and in which she catches hearts without intending to, and without knowing it. It is a maiden glancing like a woman. It is rare that deep reverie is not born of this glance wherever it may fall. All that is pure, and all that is vestal, is concentrated in this celestial immortal glance, which, more than the studied ogling of the coquette, has the magic power of suddenly forcing into bloom, in the depths of a heart, this flower of the shade, full of perfumes and poisons, which is called love. At night, on returning to his garret, Marius cast a look upon his dress, and for the first time perceived that he had the slovenliness, the indecency, and the unheard of stupidity to promenade in the Luxembourg with his everyday suit, a hat broken near the band, coarse teamster's boots, black pantaloons shiny at the knees, and a black coat threadbare at the elbows. Part 4. The next day, at the usual hour, Marius took from his closet his new coat, his new pantaloons, his new hat, and his new boots. He dressed himself in this panoply complete, put on his gloves, prodigious prodigality, and went to the Luxembourg. On reaching the Luxembourg, Marius took a turn around the fountain and looked at the swans. Then he remained for a long time in contemplation before a statue, the head of which was black with moss, and which was minus a hip. Then he took another turn around the fountain. Finally he went toward his walk slowly, and as if with regret. One would have said that he was at once compelled to go and was prevented from going. He was unconscious of all of this, and thought he was doing as he did every day. When he entered the walk, he saw Monsieur Leblanc and the young girl at the other end on their seat. He buttoned his coat, stretched it down that there might be no wrinkles, noticed with some complacence the lustre of his pantaloons, and marched upon the seat. There was something of attack in this march, and certainly a desire of conquest. I say, then, he marched upon the seat, as I would say Hannibal marched upon Rome. As he drew nearer, his step became slower and slower. At some distance from the seat, long before he had reached the end of the walk, he stopped. He did not know himself how it happened, but he turned back. He did not even say to himself that he would not go to the end. It was doubtful if the young girl could see him so far off, and notice his fine appearance in his new suit. However, he held himself very straight, so that he might look well, in case anybody who was behind should happen to notice him. He reached the opposite end and then returned, and this time he approached a little nearer to the seat. He even came to within about 3 trees of it, but there he felt an indescribable lack of power to go further, and he hesitated. He thought he had seen the young girl's face bent toward him. Still, he made a great and manly effort, conquered his hesitation, and continued his advance. In a few seconds he was passing before the seat, erect and firm, blushing to his ears, without daring to cast a look to the right or to the left, and with his hands in his coat like a statesman. At the moment he passed under the guns of the fortress, he felt a frightful palpitation of the heart. She wore, as on the previous day, her damask dress and her crape hat. He heard the sound of an ineffable voice, which might be her voice. She was talking quietly. She was very pretty. He felt it, though he made no effort to see her. He passed the seat, went to the end of the walk, which was quite near, then turned and passed again before the beautiful girl. This time he was very pale. Indeed, he was experiencing nothing that was not very disagreeable. He walked away from the seat and from the young girl, and although his back was turned, he imagined that she was looking at him, and that made him stumble. He made no effort to approach the seat again. He stopped midway on the walk and sat down there, a thing which he never did, casting many side glances and thinking in the most indistinct depths of his mind that after all it might be difficult for persons whose white hat and black dress he admired to be absolutely insensible to his glossy pantaloons and his new coat. At the end of a quarter of an hour he rose, as if to recommence his walk toward this seat, which was encircled by a halo. He, however, stood silent and motionless. For the first time in 15 months he said to himself, this gentleman, who sat there every day with his daughter, had undoubtedly noticed him, and probably thought his assiduity very strange. For the first time also, he felt a certain irreverence in designating this unknown man, even in the silence of his thought, by the nickname of Monsieur Leblanc. He remained thus for some minutes with his head down, tracing designs on the ground with a little stick which he had in his hand. Then he turned abruptly away from the seat, away from Monsieur Leblanc and his daughter, and went home. That day he forgot to go to dinner. At 8 o'clock in the evening he discovered it, and as it was too late to go down to the Rue Saint-Jacques, no matter, said he, and he ate a piece of bread. He did not retire until he had carefully brushed and folded his coat. Part 5. Thus a fortnight rolled away. Marius went to the Luxembourg, no longer to promenade, but to sit down, always in the same place, and without knowing why. Once there he did not stir. Every morning he put on his new suit, not to be conspicuous, and he began again the next morning. She was indeed of a marvellous beauty. The only remark which could be made that would resemble criticism is that the contradiction between her look, which was sad, and her smile, which was joyous, gave to her countenance something a little wild, which produced this effect, that at certain moments this sweet face became strange without ceasing to be charming. On one of the last days of the second week, Marius was as usual sitting on his seat, holding in his hand an open book of which he had not turned a leaf for 2 hours. Suddenly he trembled. A great event was commencing at the end of the walk. Monsieur Leblanc and his daughter had left their seat. The daughter had taken the arm of the father, and they were coming slowly towards the middle of the walk where Marius was. Marius closed his book. Then he opened it. Then he made an attempt to read. He trembled. The halo was coming straight toward him. Oh dear, thought he. I shall not have the time to take an attitude. However, the man with the white hair and the young girl were advancing. It seemed to him that it would last a century, that it was only a second. What are they coming by here for? He asked himself. What? Is she going to pass this place? Are her feet going to press this ground in this walk but a step from me? He was overwhelmed. He would gladly have been very handsome. He would gladly have worn the Legion of Honor. He heard the gentle and measured sound of their steps approaching. He imagined that Monsieur Leblanc was hurling angry looks upon him. Is he going to speak to me? Thought he. He bowed his head. When he raised it, they were quite near him. The young girl passed, and in passing she looked at him. She looked at him steadily with a sweet and thoughtful look, which made Marius tremble from head to foot. It seemed to him that she approached him, reproached him for having been so long without coming to her, and that she said, It is I who come? Marius was bewildered by these eyes, full of flashing light and fathomless abysses. He felt as though his brain was on fire. She had come to him, what happiness! And then how she had looked at him! She seemed more beautiful than she had ever seen before. Beautiful with a beauty which combined all of the woman with all of the angel. A beauty which would have made Petrarch sing and Dante kneel. He felt as though he was swimming in the deep blue sky. At the same time he was horribly disconcerted, because he had little dust on his boots. He felt sure that she had seen his boots in this condition. He followed her with his eyes until she disappeared. Then he began to walk in the Luxembourg like a madman. It is probable that at times he laughed, alone as he was, and spoke aloud. He was so strange and dreamy when near the children's nurse that everyone thought that he was in love with her. Part 6. A whole month passed, during which Marius went every day to the Luxembourg. When the hour came, nothing could keep him away. He is out at service, said Courfeyrac. Marius lived in transports. It is certain that the young girl looked at him. He finally grew bolder, and approached nearer to the seat. However, he passed before it no more, obeying at once the instinct of timidity and the instinct of prudence, peculiar to lovers. He thought it better not to attract the attention of the father. He formed his combinations of stations behind trees and the pedestals of statues with consummate art, so as to be seen as much as possible by the young girl and as little as possible by the old gentleman. Sometimes he would stand for half an hour motionless behind some Leonidas or Spartacus, with a book in his hand, over which his eyes, timidly raised, were looking for the young girl, while she, for her part, was turning her charming profile toward him, suffused with a smile, while yet talking in the most natural and quiet way in the world with the white-haired man. She rested upon Marius all the dreams of a maidenly and passionate eye. Ancient and immemorial art, which Eve knew from the first day of the world, and which every woman knows from the first day of her life. Her tongue replied to one, and her eyes to the other. We must, however, suppose that Monsieur Leblanc perceived something of this at last, for often when Marius came he would rise and begin to promenade. He had left their accustomed place, and had taken the seat at the other end of the walk near the gladiator, as if to see whether Marius would follow them. Marius did not understand it, and committed that blunder. The father began to be less punctual, and did not bring his daughter every day. Sometimes he came alone. Then Marius didn't stay. Another blunder. He committed a third, a monstrous one. He wanted to know where she lived. He followed her. She lived in the Rue de l'Ouest, in the least frequented part of it, in a new 3-story house of modest appearance. From that moment Marius added to his happiness in seeing her at the Luxembourg the happiness of following her home. One night, after he had followed them home and seen them disappear at the porte cochere, he entered after them and said boldly to the porter, "Is it the gentleman on the first floor who has just walked in?" "No," answered the porter. "It is the gentleman on the third." Another fact. Next day, Monsieur Leblanc and his daughter made a short visit to the Luxembourg. They went away while it was yet broad daylight. Marius followed them into the Rue de l'Ouest, as was his custom. On reaching the porte cochere, Monsieur Leblanc passed his daughter in, and then stopped, and before entering himself turned and looked steadily at Marius. The day after that they did not come to the Luxembourg. Marius waited in vain all day. At nightfall he went to the Rue de l'Ouest, and saw a light in the windows of the 3rd story. He walked beneath these windows until the light was put out. He passed a week in this way. On the 8th day, when he reached the house, there was no light in the windows. "What?" said he. "The lamp is not yet lighted, but yet it is dark, or they have gone out." He waited until 10 o'clock, till midnight, till 1 o'clock in the morning. No light appeared in the 3rd-story windows, and nobody entered the house. He went away gloomy. On the morrow, Marius knocked at the porte cochere, went in, and said to the porter, "The gentleman of the 3rd floor." "Moved," answered the porter. Marius tottered, and said feebly, "Since when?" "Yesterday." "Where does he live now?" "I don't know anything about it." "He has not left his new address, then?" "No."